wait, hold on. Good morning, everybody. Hello, hi, hi. Good morning. There we go. We got some music. Sarah, hello, hi. I got a little bit of lag happening. Sorry it took so long. My kiddies decided they wanted to have breakfast. My kiddies decided they wanted to have breakfast. Right before I started streaming, so I fed them real quick. Also, I had taken some time to try to put a heating patch on my shoulder because I don't know, I slept so badly. I slept real badly. My shoulder hurts real bad. Also, I have a capsicum patch on. Make sure that it's not hurting. I feel like I'm behind, so I'm just updating my Twitter, updating my Discord, so that everyone knows that I'm going live. So please bear with me. Sarah, how are you doing today? I hope you are doing well. Did that. Alright. Do the same thing for Discord real quick, and then I am all yours. I'm all yours, guys. What do you think of this music? I found it last night and I was in love. It was so good. It's so nice. But today we are going to be continuing on with the Night Circus. I am excited. I have been in love with the story so far. I have been thoroughly enjoying it. I am enjoying reading it with you guys. I am enjoying it. The story itself is so good. I don't know. I've been having a fun time with this. Alright. I'm gonna heat up some soup for dinner to just read. Of course! Soup. Soup sounds delicious. I am actually having a cup of tea right now. I couldn't eat breakfast. I had like some toast, but it was just... I just couldn't feel the hunger, you know? Ah! Ow, shoulder. Okay. My shoulder is still very much hurting. Let me get myself comfortable and just shift my butt in the seat comfortably. There we go. Alrighty. I slept so badly last night, y'all. I slept so poorly. I had the weirdest dream, and the dream wasn't even about me. It was like I was dreaming about someone else's life. And it made me so angry. It was such a dream that made me both very sad and very angry. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was like, God damn it. And then I couldn't go back to sleep because I was just angry. And I was just so upsetty spaghetti about it. I was like, why? I have no reason to be angry, but apparently this dream says otherwise. I am not supposed to be angry, so I'm not going to go into details about it because it's kind of personal, but it just involves a lot of things that made me angry, so I was like, ugh, forget it. Holy balls, Kate and Noctis is streaming. Yes, I am. I am streaming indeed. But we're going to continue again with the Night Circus. The last time we left off, one of the founders had passed away due to an accident. Or was it an accident? Kind of sussy how she just kind of walked in front of that train, not seeing it. I don't know. But we're going to continue on. We left off at part 3. This book is broken up into like 4 or 5 parts, so we are at part 3 now. This is a very long book, but I am so enjoying it. Holy sugar, honey, iced tea, I'm still a mod here. Yes, you are. You've never not stopped being a mod. But it's good to see you, Cal. Thank you for stopping by. Alright, let's get into it. Part 3. Intersections. I would dearly love to read the reactions, the observations of each and every person who walks through the gates of Les Secteurs Reefs, to know what they see and hear and feel, to see how their experience overlaps with my own, how it differs. I have been fortunate enough to receive letters with such information, to have reviewers share with me the writings from journals or thoughts scribbled on scraps of paper. We add our own stories each visit, each night spent at the circus. I suppose there will never be a lack of things to say, of stories to be told and shared. Friedrich Thiessen, 1895. The Lovers. Standing on the platform in the midst of the crowd, high enough that they could be viewed clearly from all angles, are 2 figures, still as statues. The woman wears a dress something akin to a bridal gown, constructed for a ballerina, white and frothy and laced with black ribbons that flutter in the night air. Her legs are encased in striped stockings, her feet in tall, black button-up boots. Her hair is piled in waves upon her head, adorned with sprays of white feathers. Her companion is a handsome man, somewhat taller than she, in an impeccably tailored black pinstripe suit. His shirt is a crisp white, his tie black and pristinely knotted. A black bowler hat sits upon his head. They stand entwined but not touching, their heads tilted towards each other, lips frozen in the moment before or after the kiss. Though you watch them for some time, they do not move. No stirring of fingertips or eyelashes, no indication that they are even breathing. They cannot be real, someone nearby remarks. Many patrons only glance at them before moving on, but the longer you watch, the more you can detect the subtlest of motions. The change in the curve of a hand as it hovers near an arm, the shifting angle of a perfectly balanced leg, each of them always gravitating towards each other, yet they still do not touch. 13. London, Friday, October 13th, 1899. The grand anniversary celebration for Les Secteurs is not held after 10 years, which might have been expected and traditional, but when the circus has been open and traveling for years amounting to 13. Some say it is held then because the 10th anniversary had come and gone, and no one thought to have a party for it until after the fact. The reception is held at Chandresh Christophe Lefebvre's townhouse on Friday, October 13th, 1899. The guest list is exclusive. Only members of the circus and some select and special guests are in attendance. It is not publicized, of course, and though some might speculate that the event has something to do with the circus, there is no way to be certain. Besides, no one truly suspects the infamously black and white circus would be associated with an event so full of color. It is extremely colorful, with both the house and the partygoers adorned in rainbow of shades. The lights in each room are specially treated, greens and blues in one, reds and oranges in the other. The tables dotting the dining room are shrouded in vibrant patterned tablecloths. The centerpieces are elaborate floral arrangements with only the brightest of blooms. The members of the ensemble that play odd but melodic and danceable tunes in the ballroom are bedecked in suits of red velvet. Even the champagne flutes are a deep cobalt blue glass rather than clear, and the staff wears green rather than black. Chandresh himself wears a suit of vibrant purple with a gold paisley waistcoat. And throughout the evening he smokes specially made cigars that spout matching violet smoke. A spectrum of roses, ranging in the shades from natural to the unimaginable, sits in the golden lap of the elephant-headed statue in the foyer, petals cascading down whenever anyone moves by. Cocktails are poured at the bar in a variety of oddly shaped and colored glasses. There is ruby red wine and cloudy green absinthe. Tapestries of vibrant silk hang from walls and are draped over everything that will stay still. Candles glow in stained glass sconces, casting dancing lights over the party and its attendees. Poppet and Widget are the youngest of the guests, being the same age as the circus. Their bright red hair is out in full effect, and they wear coordinating outfits in the warm blue of a twilight sky, edged in pinks and yellows. As a birthday gift, Chandresh gives them 2 fluffy orange kittens with blue eyes and striped ribbons around their necks. Poppet and Widget adore them and promptly dub them Boots and Pavo. Though later they can never quite remember which of the identical kittens is which and refer to them collectively whenever possible. The original conspirators are there, save for the late Tara Burgess. Lady Burgess comes dressed in a flowing gown of canary yellow, accompanied by Mr. Ethan Barris in a suit of navy blue that is about as colorful as he can manage. though his tie is a slightly brighter shade, and he pins a yellow rose to his lapel. Mr. A.H. arrives in his customary gray. Madame Pava attends after some coercion by Chandresh, gloriously adorned in golden silks, embroidered with red filigree, crimson feathers in her white hair. She spends most of the evening in one of the chairs by the fire, watching events unfold around her rather than participating in them directly. Herr Frederick Thyssen is there by special invitation, under the condition that he is not to write a single public word about the gatherings nor mention it to anyone. He promises this gladly, and attends wearing mostly red with a touch of black, a reversal of his usual attire. He spends the majority of the evening in the company of Celia Bowen, whose elaborate gown changes color, shifting through a rainbow of hues to complement whoever she is closest to. There are no performers save the band, as it is difficult to hire entertainment to impress a gathering that is comprised predominantly of circus members. Most of the evening is spent in conversation and socialization. At dinner, which begins promptly at midnight, each course is styled in black or white but burst with colors once pierced with the forks or spoons, revealing layers upon layers of flavor. Some dishes are served on small mirrors rather than proper plates. Poppet and Widget slip tastes appropriate morsels to the marmalade kittens at their feet, while listening attentively to Madame Padva's tales of the ballet. Their mother admonishes that the content of said tales may not be entirely appropriate for a pair of just barely 13-year-olds. But Madame Padva continues on unfazed, glossing over only the most sordid of details that Widget can read in the sparkle of her eyes, even if she does not speak them out loud. Dessert consists mainly of a gargantuan tiered cake shaped to resemble the circus tents and frosted in stripes, the filling within a bright shock of raspberry cream. There are also miniature chocolate leopards and strawberries coated in looping powders of dark and white chocolate. After dessert had been cleared, Chandresh makes a lengthy speech thanking all the guests for 13 spectacular years for the wonderment of the circus that has been nothing but an idea more than a decade ago. It goes on for some time about dreams and family and striving for uniqueness in a world of sameness. Some of it is profound and other bits are rambling and nonsensical, but it is considered a sweet gesture by almost everyone in attendance. Many take the opportunity afterwards to thank him personally for the party and the circus. Several make a point of commenting on his sentiments, excepting, of course, for his remark about how none of them seemed to have aged, save for the Murray twins, which was followed by an awkward silence broken only by the sound of Mr. Barris coughing. No one dares mention it, and it may seem somewhat relieved that Chandresh himself does not recall most of his comments even an hour later. There is dancing after dinner in the ballroom, where lengths of colorful, gold-embellished silk cascade over the walls and windows, glimmering in the candlelight. Mr. A.H., moving along the periphery, going mostly unnoticed and speaking with only a few of the other guests, including Mr. Barris, who introduced him to Herr Thyssen. The three men have a brief yet engaging conversation about clocks and the nature of time before Mr. A.H. makes a polite excuse and fades into the background once again. He avoids the ballroom entirely, save for a single waltz when Tsukiko coerces him onto the dance floor. She wears a gown fashioned from a pink kimono, her hair piled in an elaborate knotted style and her eyes rimmed in a striking red. Their combined grace puts all the other couples to shame. Isabel, clad in clear sky blue, tries in vain to catch Marco's attention. He avoids her at every turn and is difficult to spot in the crowd since he is dressed identically to the rest of his staff. Eventually, with the aid of several champagne glasses, Tsukiko persuades her to abandon the effort, drawing her out into the sunken garden to distract her. Marco's attention, when he is not being ordered around by Chandresh, are hovering over Madame Padva, who hits him with her cane when he asks her multiple times if she is in need of any assistance. Belongs only to Celia. It is destroying me that I cannot ask you to dance, Marco whispers as she passes by him in the ballroom, the deep green of his suit seeping across her gown like moss. Then you are far too easily destructible. Celia murmurs softly, winking at him as Shadrach sweeps by and offers her his arm. The spreading moss is crushed by a deep plum and sparkling gold as he pulls her away. Shadrach introduced Celia to Mr. A.H., unable to recall if they have met before. Celia claims that they have not, though she remembers the gentleman who politely takes her hand, as he looks exactly the same as he did when she was 6 years old. Only his suit has changed, updated to fit the current style. Several people pester Celia to perform. While at first she refuses, late in the evening she relents, pulling a bemused Sukiko to the middle of the dance floor and making her disappear in the blink of an eye, despite the crowd around them. One moment there are 2 women in petal pink gowns, and the next Celia is alone. Seconds later, there are shrieks from the library as Sukiko reappears in the lantern-festooned sarcophagus propped up in the corner. Sukiko takes a glass of champagne from a stunned waiter, gives him a beatific smile before returning to the ballroom. She passes by Poppet and Widget, where Poppet is teaching the Marmalade kittens to climb on her shoulders, and Widget is pulling book after book from the library's well-stocked shelves. Eventually, Poppet drags him forcibly from the room to prevent him from spending the duration of the party reading. Guests move in flocks of color from the ballroom through the hall and library, a constantly shifting rainbow punctuated with laughter and chatter. The mood remains boisterous and bright, even in the earliest hours. As Celia walks alone through the front hall, Marco grabs her hand, pulling her into a shadowed alcove behind the looming gold statue, the rose petals swirling madly with the sudden shift in the air. "I'm not entirely used to that, you know," Celia says. She takes her hand from his but does not move away, though there is not a great deal of room between the wall and the statue. The color of her gown settles into a deep, solid green. "You look just as you did the first time I saw you," Marco says. "I take it you wore that color on purpose?" Celia asks. "Merely a fortunate coincidence. Chandrash insists on putting the entire staff in green, and then I did not anticipate the ingenuity of your attire." Celia shrugs her shoulders. "I couldn't decide what to wear." "You're beautiful," Margot says. "Thank you," Celia responds, refusing to meet his eyes. "You're too handsome. I prefer your actual face." His face changes, reverting to the one she recalls in perfect detail from the evening they spent in the same rooms 3 years ago under much more intimate circumstances. There has been little opportunity since then for anything more than 2 brief stolen moments. "Isn't that a bit risky to wear in this company?" Celia asks. "I'm only doing it for you," Margot says. "The rest of them will see me as they always have." They stand watching each other in silence as a laughing group moves through the hall on the other side of the statue. The din echoes through the space, but they stay far enough away that Celia and Marco escape any notice, and Celia's gown remains mossy and green. Marco lifts his hand to brush a stray curl away from Celia's face, tugging it behind her ear and stroking her cheek with his fingertips. Her eyelids flutter closed, and the rose petals around their feet begin to stir. "I've missed you," he whispered softly. The air between them is electric as he leans in, gently brushing his lips against her neck. In the next room, the guests complain about the sudden increase in temperature. Fans are drawn from colorful bags, fluttering like tropical birds. In the shadow of the elephant-headed statue, Celia pulls away suddenly. It is not immediately apparent why until the clouds of gray begin swirling through the green of her gown. "Hello, Alexander," she says, dipping her head in acknowledgement to the man who appeared behind them without a sound, not even disturbing the rose petals strewn across the floor. The man in the gray suit greets her with a polite nod. "Miss Bowen, I would like to speak with your companion privately for a moment, if you do not mind." "Of course," Celia says. She leaves without even glancing at Marco, her gown shifting from gray dawn to a violet sunset as she walks down the hall to where the Murray twins are attempting their marmalade kittens with shiny silver coffee spoons. "I cannot say I find this behavior appropriate," the man in the gray suit says to Marco. "You know her," Marco says quietly, his eyes still on Celia as she stops at the entrance to the ballroom. Her gown is cloaked in crimson as Hale Thyssen offers her a glass of champagne. I have met her. I cannot rightfully say that I know her in any particular fashion. You knew exactly who she was before any of this started, and you never thought to tell me. I did not think it necessary. The bevy of guests wandered through the halls from the dining room, sending the cascade of rose petals adrift once more. Marco escorts the man in the gray suit through the library, sliding the stained glass open to access the empty game room and continue their conversation. 13 years with barely a word, and now you wish to speak with me? Marco asks. I did not have anything in particular to speak to you about. I simply wish to interrupt your conversation with Miss Bowen. She knows your name. She clearly has a very good memory. What is it you would like to discuss? I would like to know if I'm doing well, Marco says, his voice low and cold. Your progress has been sufficient, the instructor says. Your employment here is steady, and you have a suitable position from your work. You have a suitable position to work from. And yet I cannot be myself. You teach me all these things, and then you put me here to pretend to be something I'm not, while she is center stage doing exactly what she does. But no one in that room believes it. They think she is deceiving them. They do not see what she is any more than they see what you are. She is simply more noticeable. This is not about having an audience. I am proving a point. You can do just as much as she does without passing it off as flamboyant spectacle and trickery. You can maintain your relative anonymity and equal her accomplishments. I suggest you keep your distance from her and concentrate on your work. I am in love with her. Never before has anything Marco said or did elect a visible response from the man in the gray suit, not even when he once accidentally set a table aflame during his lessons. But the expression that comes from the man's face is now unmistakably sad. I am sorry to hear that, he says. It will make the challenge a great deal more difficult for you. We've been playing at this for more than a decade. When does it end? It ends when there is a victor. And how long does that take? Marco asks. It is difficult to say. The most recent previous challenge lasted 37 years. We cannot keep this circus running for 37 years. Then you will not have as long as a time to wait. You are a fine student. You are a fine competitor. How can you know? Marco asks, his voice rising. You have not even seen fit to speak to me for years. I have done nothing for you. Everything I have done, every change I have made to that circus, every impossible feat and astounding sight I have done for her. Your motives do not impact the game. I am done playing with your game. I am done with playing your game, Marco says. I quit. You cannot quit, his instructor implies. You are bound to this, to her. The challenge will continue. One of you will lose. You will have no choice in the matter. Marco picks up a ball from the billiard table and hurls it at the man in the gray suit. He steps out of its path easily, and it crashes instead into the sunset of stained glass. Without a word, Marco turns his back on his instructor. He walks out of the door at the back of the room, not even noticing Isabel when he passes her in the hall, where she had been close enough to hear the argument. He goes directly into the ballroom, making his way to the center of the dance floor. He takes Celia's arm, spinning her away from Hale Thyssen. Marco pulls her to him in an emerald embrace, so close that no distinction remains between where his suit ends and her gown begins. To Celia, there's suddenly no one else in the room as he holds her in his arms. But before she can vocalize her surprise, his lips close over hers and she is lost in a wordless bliss. Marco kisses her as though they are the only two people in the world. The air swirls in a tempest around them, blowing open the glass doors to the garden with a tangle of billowing curtains. Every eye in the crowded ballroom turns their attention. Then he releases her and walks away. By the time Marco leaves the room, almost everyone has forgotten the incident entirely. It was replaced by a momentary confusion that is blamed on the heat or the excessive amounts of champagne. Hal Thyssen cannot recall why Celia had suddenly stopped dancing, or when her gown shifted to its current deep green. Is something wrong, he asks, when she realizes that she is trembling. Mr. A.H. storms through the front hall, somehow avoiding tripping over Poppet and Widget, who are sprawled on the floor teaching Boots and Pavel how to turn circles with their hind legs. Widget hands Boots, or Pavel, to Poppet and follows the man in the gray suit. He watches as he crosses into the foyer, retrieves his gray top hat and silver cane from the butler, and leaves by the front door. After he exits, Widget presses his nose to the nearest window, watching him as he passes beneath the street lamps before disappearing into darkness. Poppet catches up with him then. The kittens perched on her shoulders, purring happily. Chandresh follows close behind her, making his way through the crowd in the hall. "What is it?" Poppet asks. "What's the matter?" Richard turns away from the glass. "That man has no shadow," he says, as Chandresh leans over the tins to peer out the window at the empty street. "What did you say?" Chandresh asks, but Poppet and Widget and the orange kittens have already run off down the hall, lost in the colorful crowd. Bedtime Stories, Concord, Massachusetts, October 1902. Bailey spends much of the early part of this evening with Poppet and Widget, exploring the labyrinth. A dizzying network of chambers, interspersed with hallways containing mismatched doors, rooms that spin and rooms that glow with chessboard floors. One hall is stacked high with suitcases. Another, it is snowing. "How is this possible?" Bailey asks, melting flakes of snow sticking to his coat. In response, Poppet only throws a snowball at him, and Widget only laughs. While they traverse the labyrinth, Widget tells the story of the Minotaur in such detail that Bailey keeps expecting to encounter the monster around every turn. They reach a room resembling a large metal birdcage, with only darkness visible through the bars. The door in the floor that they entered through latches, once it falls closed, cannot be opened again. There appears to be no other way to the exit. Widget ceases his narration as they investigate each silver bar, finding no hidden openings or cleverly disguised hinges. Poppet grows visibly distressed. After a considerable amount of time spent trapped within the room, Bailey finds a key concealed in the seat of the swing in the middle of his cage. When he turns it, the swing itself rises and the top of the cage opens, allowing them to climb out, escaping into a dimly lit temple guarded by an albino sphinx. While the temple has at least a dozen doors along its walls, Poppet immediately finds one that leads back to the circus. She still seems upset, but before Bailey can ask her if something is the matter, Richard checks his watch and finds they are late for their scheduled performance. The three of them agree to meet up again later, and the twins disappear into the crowd. Bailey has seen the kittens so many times over the last few nights that he practically has the routine memorized, so he opts to explore by himself while he waits for them to be free again. I should take a sip of tea, hold on. The particular path he chooses to wander down has no obvious doors. It is only a passageway between tents, endless stripes illuminated by flickering lights. He notices an uneven spot in the alternating black and white. Bailey finds a gap in the side of one of the tents, a split in the fabric, each edge dotted with silver grommets and a black ribbon, hangs just above his head, as though this opening was meant to be laced together to keep the tent from firmly closed. He wonders as if some circus member forgot to relace it. He then sees the tag. It is the size of a large postcard, attached to the black ribbon the way one might attach a gift card to a present. The tag hangs loosely a few feet off the ground. Bailey turns it over. The picture's side shows a black and white etching of a child in a bed covered in fluffy pillows and a checkered quilt, not in a nursery, but under a star-sprinkled night sky. The opposite side is white with an elegant calligraphy in the black ink that reads, "Bedtime stories, eventide rhapsodies, anthologies of memory. Please enter cautiously, and feel free to open what is closed." Bailey cannot tell if the tag refers to the breaks in the tent, or if it has been misplaced for some other tent. Most of the tents have prominently placed signs in the painted wood, and entrances that are clearly defined or marked. This one seems as though it was not meant to be found. Other patrons pass by on their way from one part of the circus to another, too absorbed in their conversation to notice him contemplating a postcard-sized tag by the side of a tent. Tentatively, Bailey pulls the unlaced flaps apart, enough to peek inside to try to discern if this is indeed a separate circus attraction and not the back of the acrobat tent or some sort of storage area. He can make out only several twinkling lights in shapes that could possibly be furniture. Still unsure, he pulls the flaps apart enough to enter, stepping inside carefully per the instructions on the postcard, which proves wise as he walks directly into a table covered in jars and bottles and lidded bowls that rattle against one another. He stops, hoping not to knock anything over. It is a long room, the size of a formal dining table. The size of a formal dining room, or maybe it only resembles a dining room because of the table, which stretches the length of the tent, though there is enough room to maneuver around it carefully. All of the jars and bottles are different. Some jars are simple glass, mason jars, and others are glazed ceramic jars or ornate frosted glass. There are silver-lidded sugar bowls and containers that look rather like urns. They appear to be in no particular pattern or order, and they are simply strewn across the table. There are additional jars and bottles around the periphery of the room as well, with some on the ground and some on boxes and tall wooden bookshelves. The only element that correlates the room with the picture on the tag is the ceiling. It is black and covered with tiny twinkling lights. The effect is almost identical to the upward view of the night sky from the outside. Bailey wonders how all of this might relate to a child in bed or to bedtime stories as he walks around the table. He recalls what the tag said about opening things, wondering what could possibly be inside all of these jars. Most of the clear glass ones look empty. As he reaches the opposite side of the table, he picks one at random, a small round ceramic jar, glazed in black with a high shine, and a lid topped with a round curl of a handle. He pulls the lid off and looks inside. A small wisp of smoke escapes, but other than that it is empty. As he peers inside, he smells the smoke of a roaring fire, and the hint of snow and of roasting chestnuts. Curious, he inhales deeply. There is the aroma of mulled wine and sugared candy, peppermint, and pipe tobacco smoke. The crisp pine scent of a fir tree, the wax of dripping candles. He can almost feel the snow, the excitement and the anticipation, the sugary taste of striped candy. It is dizzying and wonderful and disturbing. After a few moments, he replaces the lid and puts the jar carefully back on the table. He looks around at the jars and bottles, intrigued but hesitant to open another one. He picks up a frosted glass mason jar and unscrews the silver metal lid. This jar is not empty but contains a small amount of white sand which shifts on the bottom. The scent that wafts from it is the unmistakable smell of the ocean, a bright summer day at the seashore. You can hear the sounds of waves crashing against the sand, the cry of a seagull. There's something mysterious as well, something fantastical. The flag of a pirate ship on the far horizon, a mermaid's tail flipping out of sight behind a wave. The scent and the feeling are adventurous and exhilarating, with a salty tinge of a sea breeze. Bailey closes the jar and the scent and the feeling fade, trapped back inside the glass with a handful of sand. Next, he chooses a bottle from a shelf on the wall, wondering if there are any distinctions between jars and bottles on the table and the ones that surround it, if there is an indiscernible filing system for these curious containers. This bottle is tall and thin, with a cork held in place by a silver wire. He removes it with some difficulty, and it opens with a popping noise. There's something in the bottom of the bottle, but he cannot tell what it is. The scent wafting from the thin neck is bright and floral. A rose bush full of dew-dripping blossoms, the mossy smell of garden dirt. He feels as though he is walking down a garden path. There is the buzzing of bees and the melody of songbirds in the trees. He inhales more deeply, and there are flowers along with the roses. There are other flowers along with the roses. Lilies and irises and crocuses. The leaves of the trees are rustling in the soft, warm wind, and the sound of someone else's footsteps falling not far from his own. The sensation of a cat brushing past his leg is so genuine that he looks down expecting to see it. But there is nothing on the floor of the tent but more jars and bottles. Bailey puts the cork back in the bottle and returns it to the shelf. Then he chooses another. Tucked in the back of one of the shelves is a small bottle, rounded with a short neck and closed with a matching glass stopper. He picks it up carefully. It is heavier than he had expected. Removing the stopper, he's confused at first at the scent, and the sensations do not change. Then comes the aroma of a caramel wafting up on the crisp breeze of an autumn wind. The scent of wool and sweat makes him feel as though he is wearing a heavy coat, with the warmth of a scarf around his neck. There is the impression of people wearing masks. The smell of a bonfire mixes with the caramel. And there is a movement in front of him. Something gray. A sharp pain in his chest. The sensation of falling. A sound like howling wind or a screaming girl. Billy puts the stopper back, disturbed. Not wanting to end on such an experience, he places the strange little bottle back on his shelf and decides to choose one more before leaving to catch up and pop in a widget again. He picks one of the boxes on the table this time. A polished wood box with a swirling pattern etched into its lid. The inside of the box is lined with white silk. The scent is like incense, deep and spiced. And you can feel smoke curling around his head. It is a hot, dry desert air, with a pounding sun and powder-soft sand. His cheeks flush from the heat and from something else. The feel and sensation of something as luscious as silk falls across his skin in waves. There is a music that he cannot discern, a pipe or a flute, and laughter, a high-pitched laugh that blends harmoniously with the music. The taste has something sweet but spicy on his tongue. The feeling is luxurious and lighthearted, but also secretive and sensual. He feels a hand on his shoulder and jumps in surprise, dropping the lid down on the box. The sensation ends abruptly. Bailey stands alone in the tent, underneath the twinkling stars. That is enough, he thinks. He goes back to the flap in the tent wall, careful not to disturb any of the jars or bottles nearby. He stops to adjust the tag that hangs from the ribbon on the tent flap, so that it is more easily visible, though he is not certain why. The illustration of the child asleep in his bed beneath the stars, face outward, but it is difficult to tell if the child's dreams are peaceful or restless. He walks back to find Poppin and Widget, wondering if they might want to head to the courtyard for something to eat. Then the scent of caramel wafts by as he walks, and Bailey finds he is not particularly hungry after all. Bailey wanders down curving paths, his mind preoccupied with bottles full of mysteries. As he turns a corner, he encounters a raised platform with a statue still occupant, but this one is different than the snow-covered woman he had once seen before. This woman's skin is shimmering and pale. Her long black hair is tied with dozens of silver. Gosh, words are hard today. Her long black hair is tied with dozens of silver ribbons that fall over her shoulders. Her gown is white, covered in what to Bailey looks like looping black embroidery. But as he walks closer, he sees that the black marks are actually words written across the fabric. When he is near enough to read parts of the gown, he realizes that there are love letters inscribed in the handwritten text. Words of desire and longing wrapping around her waist, flowing down the train of her gown as it spills over the platform. The statue herself is still, but her hand is held out, and only then does Bailey notice the young woman with the red scarf standing in front of her, offering the love letter-clad statue a single crimson rose. The movement is so subtle that it is almost undetectable, but slowly, very slowly, the statue reaches to accept the rose. Her finger is open. The young woman with the rose waits patiently as the statue gradually closes her hand around the stem, releasing it only when it is secure. And then the young woman bows to the statue and walks off into the crowd. The statue continues to hold the rose. The color seems more vibrant against the black and white of her gown. Bailey is still watching the statue when Poppet taps him on the shoulder. She's my favorite, Poppet says, looking up at the statue with him. Who is she? Bailey asks. She has a lot of names, Poppet says, but mostly they call her the Paramour. I'm glad someone gave her a flower tonight. I do it myself, sometimes, if she doesn't have one. I don't think she looks complete without it. The statue is lifting the rose, gradually, to her face. Her eyelids slowly close. What did you do with your time? Poppet asks as they walked away from the Paramour towards the courtyard. I found a tent full of bottles and things that I wasn't sure I was supposed to be in, Bailey says. It was strange. To his surprise, Poppet laughs. That's Widget's tent, she explains. Celia made it for him as a place to practice putting down his stories. He claims it's easier than writing things out. Widget says he wants to practice reading people, by the way, so he can catch up with him later. He does that sometimes to pick up bits of story. He'll probably be down in the Hall of Mirrors or the drawing room. What's the drawing room? Bailey asks, a curiosity about a tent he hasn't heard of winning over a fleeting thought of asking who Celia is, as he does not recall Poppet mentioning the name before. It is a tent that is made up of black, blank walls with buckets full of chalk so you can draw everywhere. Some people only sign their names, but others draw pictures. Sometimes Widge will write out little stories, but he draws things too. He's quite good at it. As they walk around the courtyard, Poppet insists he tries a spiced cocoa that is both wonderfully warming and slightly painful. He finds his appetite has returned, so they share a bowl of dumplings and a packet of pieces of edible paper with detailed illustrations on them that match their respective flavors. They wander through a tent full of mist, encountering creatures made out of paper. Curling white snakes with flickering black tongues, birds with coal-colored wings flapping through the thick fog. The dark shadow of an unidentifiable creature scurries across Poppet's boots and out of sight. She claims there's a fire-breathing paper dragon somewhere in the tent, and though Bailey believes her, he has difficulty reconciling in his head the idea of paper that breathes fire. It's getting late, Poppet remarks as they walk from tent to tent. Do you have to go home? I can stay for a while, Bailey says. He has become something of an expert at sneaking back into his house without waking anyone, so he's been staying at the circus later and later each night. Excuse me. There are fewer patrons wandering the circus at this hour, and as they walk, Bailey notes that many of them are wearing red scarves. Different types, from heavily cabled wool to fine lace, but each is a deep scarlet red that looks even redder against all of the black and white. He asks Poppet about it. Once so many flashes of red have passed by that he's sure it's not a coincidence. And recalling the young woman with the rose had a red scarf as well. It's like our uniform, she says. They're revealers. Some of them will follow the circus around. They always stay later than other people. The red is how they identify each other. Bailey tries to ask more questions about the revealers and their scarves, but before he can, Poppet pulls him into another tent and he's immediately silenced by the sight he's met with inside. The sensation reminds him of the first snow of winter, and for those few hours when everything is blanketed in white, soft and quiet. Everything in this tent is white. Nothing black, not even the stripes visible on the walls. A shimmering, almost blinding white. There are trees and flowers and grass surrounding twisted pebbles pathways, every leaf and petal perfectly white. What is this? Bailey asked. He did not have a chance to read the sign outside the door. This is the ice garden, Poppet says, pulling him down the path. It turns into an open space with a fountain in the middle, bubbling white foam over clear carved ice. Pale trees line the edge of the tent, showers of snowflakes falling from their branches. There is no one else in the tent, nothing disrupting the surroundings. Bailey peers at a nearby rose, and while it is cold and frozen and white, There was the bitterest hint of scent as he leaned closer. The scent of rose and ice and sugar. It reminds him of the spun sugar flowers sold by vendors in the courtyard. Let's play hide and seek, Papa suggests, and Bailey agrees before she unbuttons her coat and leaves on the frozen bench, her white costume rendering her all but invisible. That's not fair, he calls as she disappears behind the hanging branches of a willow tree. He follows her around the trees and topiaries, through coils of vines and roses, chasing glimpses of her red hair. Bookkeeping. London, March 1900. Chandres Christophe Lefebvre sits at the huge mahogany desk of his study, a mostly empty bottle of brandy in front of him. At one point in the evening there was a glass, being misplaced that hours ago. Wandering from room to room has become a nightly habit fueled by insomnia and boredom. He is also missing his jacket, abandoned and previously wandered through a room. It will be retrieved but without remark by a diplomatic maid in the morning. In the study, between bottle sips of brandy, he attempts to work. This mainly consists of scribbling with fountain pens or on various scraps of paper. He has not genuinely worked in years. No new ideas, no new productions. The cycle of mounting and executing and moving on to the next project has skidded to a halt, and he cannot say why. It does not make sense to him. Not this night or any other. Not at any level of brandy bottle. This is not how it's supposed to work. A project is started, it is developed and mounted and sent into the world, and more often than not it becomes self-sufficient, and then he is no longer needed. It is not always a pleasant position to be in, but it is the way of such things, and Chandresh knows this process well. One is proud, one collects one's receipts, and even if one is a bit melancholy, one moves on. The circus left him behind, sailing forth, and yet he cannot turn away from the shore. More than enough time to mourn the creative process is ignited again, but there are no new sparks of something new. No new endeavors, nothing bigger or better for nearly 14 years. Perhaps he thinks he has outdone even himself. But it's not a pleasant thought, so he drowns it in brandy and attempts to ignore it. The circus bothers him. It bothers him most at times like this, in the bottom of the brandy bottle, in this quiet of the night. It is not terribly late. The night is fairly young in circus terms, but the silence is already heavy. And now, with his bottle and his fountain pen drained, he simply sits, dragging a hand through his hair distractedly, staring across the room at nothing in particular. Flames burned low in the gilded fireplace. Tall bookcases stuffed with curios and relics loomed in the shadows. His wandering eyes drifted over to the open doorways and settled onto the door across the hall. The door to Marcos's office, tucked discreetly between a pair of Persian columns. Part of a suite of rooms that are Marcos's own, the better to keep him at the beck and call, though he is out for the evening. Chandresh wonders through an alcohol-soaked fog if perhaps Marco keeps the circus documents in his office, and what exactly those documents might contain. He has only seen the paperwork involved with the circus in passing, hasn't bothered to scrutinize the details of the thing in years. Now he is curious. Empty brandy bottle still in hand, he pulls himself to his feet and stumbles out into the hallway. It will be locked, he thinks, when he reaches the polished dark wood door, but the silver handle moves easily as he turns it. The door swings open. Chandres hesitates in the doorway. The tiny office is dark save for a pool of light spilling from the hall and the dim haze from the street lamps seeping into a single window. For a moment, Chandresh reconsiders. If there were any brandy left in the bottle, he might close the door and wander away. But the bottle is empty, in his own house after all. He fumbles for a switch on the sconce near the door, and it flickers to life, illuminating the room in front of him. The office is packed with too much furniture. Cabinets and trunks line the walls. Boxes of files are stacked up in tidy rows. The desk in the center that takes up Nearly half of the spaces are smaller, more modest version of the one in the study, though its surface holds jars of ink and pens and piles of notebooks, all in perfect order and not lost in a clutter of figurines and precious stones and antique weaponry. Chandresh puts the empty brandy bottle down on the desk and begins searching the cabinets and files, opening drawers and flipping through papers without any clear idea of what exactly he is looking for. There he does not seem to be in any particular section for the circus. Bits of it are mixed in with books of theater receipts and a list of box office returns. He's mildly surprised that there is no discernible filing system, no labels on boxes. The contents of the office are orderly but not clearly organized. In a cabinet, Chandresh finds piles of blueprints and sketches. Many bear Mr. Barris's stamps and initials, but there are other diagrams written in different hands that Chandresh does not recognize. In some cases, he cannot even distinguish what language they are described in, though each has subsectives written carefully along the edge of the paper. Pulling them closer to the light and spreading them out over what little available floor space he can find, he scrutinizes them, sheet after sheet, letting them roll and fall in piles as he moves to each subsequent piece. Even the prints that are clearly Mr. Barris's work have been written over. Additions made in different handwriting, layers are placed on top of original designs. Leaving the papers on the floor, Chandresh returns to the desk, to the neat piles of notebooks next to the abandoned brandy bottle. There appear to be bank ledgers, rows upon rows of numbers and calculations with notations and totals and dates. Chandresh tosses those aside. He turns his attention to the desk itself. He begins pulling open the heavy wooden drawers. Several are empty. One contains dozens of blank notebooks and unopened jars of ink. Another is full of old date books, the appointments, fillings of days written in some sort of shorthand, in Marco's neat, delicate handwriting. The last drawer is locked. Chandresh makes the turn to another box of files nearby, but something pulls him back to the locked drawer. There is no key in the desk. There are no locks on the other drawers. He cannot recall if there was a lock on the desk when he placed it here years ago, but the office contained only the desk and a single cabinet and seemed almost spacious. After a few minutes of looking for a key, he grows impatient and returns to his study to retrieve the silver knife that embedded into the dartboard on the wall. Lying on the floor behind the desk, he all but destroys the lock in his attempt to pry the mechanism open, but he's rewarded with the satisfying click of the latch as it relates to the blade. Leaving the knife on the floor, he pulls open the drawer and finds only a book. It is a large, leather-bound volume. Chandresh takes it from the drawer and, startled by the weight of it, and drops it with a thump onto the desk. The book is old and dusty. The leather is worn and the binding is frayed at its edges. Hesitating only a moment, Chandresh lifts the covers. The end papers are covered in an exquisite detailed drawing of a tree covered in symbols and markings. It is densely inscribed, more ink than the blank page. Chandresh cannot decipher any of it. Cannot even tell if the marks are broken into words or simply continuous strings of motifs. Here and there he spots a mark that looks familiar. Some are almost numbers. Some recall the shape of Egyptian hieroglyphs. It reminds him of the contortionist's tattoos. The pages of the book are covered with similar markings, but predominantly they hold other things, bits of paper culled from other documents. It takes Chandresh several pages to realize that each bit of paper holds a signature. It takes longer for him to realize that he knows the names. Only when he finds the page with the matching childish scrawl spelling out the names of the Murray twins, he is certain the book contains the names of each and every person involved in the circus. And only upon closer scrutiny does he notice that they are accompanied by locks of hair. The later pages hold the names of the original conspirators, and though one name is conspicuously absent and another has been removed. The final page contains his own signature, a flourish of illegible C's carefully snipped from a piece of paper that might have been an invoice or a letter. Beneath it there is a single lock of raven hair glued to the page and is surrounded by symbols and letters. Chandresh reaches up to touch the end of his hair, curling around his collar. A shadow passes over the desk and Chandresh jumps back in surprise. The book falls close. Sir? Marco stands in the doorway, watching Chandresh with a curious expression. I I thought you left for the evening, Shinjesh says. He looks down at the book and then back at Marco. I had, sir, but I forgot some of my things. Marco's eyes travel over the papers and blueprints strewn on the floor. May I ask what you are doing, sir? I might ask you the same question, Shinjesh says. What is all of this? He flips the book open again, pages fluttering and settling. Those are records for the circus, Marco says without looking at the book. What kind of records? Shinjesh presses. It's a system of my own devising, Marco says. There is quite a bit to keep in order with the circus, as you know. How long have you been doing this? Doing what, sir? Keeping all this, whatever this nonsense is. He flips through the pages of the book, though he finds he does not want to touch it now. My system goes back to the inception of the circus, Marco says. You're doing something to it, to all of us, aren't you? I'm just doing my job, sir, Marco says. There's an edge to his voice now. And if I may, I do not appreciate you going through my books without informing me. Shinjesh moves around the desk to face him, stepping over blueprints, stumbling through though his voice remains steady. You are my employee. I have every right to see what's in my own house, what's being done with my own projects. You're working with him, aren't you? You've been keeping all this from me the entire time. You had no right to go behind my back. Behind your back, Marco interrupts. You cannot even begin to comprehend the things that had gone on behind your back. They have always gone on behind your back, even before any of this had started. This is not what I wanted from this arrangement, Shinjesh says. You never had a choice about this arrangement, Marco says. You have no control, and you never did. And you never even wanted to know how things were done. You signed receipts without so much as a glance. Money is no object, you said. Nor were any of the details. Those were always left up to me. The papers on the desk ripple as Marco raises his voice and he stops, taking a step away from the desk. The papers settle again into disheveled piles. You have been sabotaging this endeavor, Shinjesh says, lying to my face, keeping God knows what in these books. What books, sir? Marco asks. Shinjesh looks back at the desk. There are no papers, no piles of ledgers. There is an inkwell next to the lamp, a brass statue of an Egyptian deity, a clock, and the empty brandy bottle. Nothing else remains on the polished wood surface. Shinjesh stumbles, looking from the desk to Marco and back, unable to focus. I will not let you do this to me, Shinjesh says, picking up the brandy bottle from the desk and brandishing it in front of him. You are dismissed from your position. You shall leave immediately. The brandy bottle vanishes. Shinjesh stops, grasping at empty air. I cannot leave, Marco says, his voice calm and controlled. He's speaking short, slowly, as though he's explaining something to a small child. I am not allowed. I must remain here, and I must continue with this nonsense, as you so aptly put it. You're going to return to your drinking and your parties. You will not even remember we had this conversation. Things will continue as they always have. That is what's going to happen. Shinjesh opens his mouth to object, and then closes it again, confused. He glances at Marco, then back at the empty desk. He looks at his hand, opening and closing his fingers, trying to grasp something that is no longer there, though he cannot remember what it was. I'm sorry, he says, turning back to Marco. I've lost my train of thought. What were we discussing? Nothing of import, sir, Marco says. Just a few minor details about the circus. Of course, Shinjesh says. Where's the circus now? Sydney, Australia, sir. His voice wavers, but he covers it with a short cough before turning away. Shinjesh only nods absently. May I take that for you, sir? Marco says, indicating the empty bottle that is once again sitting on the desk. Oh, Shinjesh says. Yes, of course. He hands the bottle to Marco without looking at him or it, barely registering the action. May I get you another, sir? Yes, thank you, Shinjesh says, wandering out of Marco's office and back to his own study. He settles into a leather armchair by the window. In the office, Marco gathers up fallen notebooks and papers with trembling hands. He rolls the blueprints and piles of the papers and books. He takes the silver knife he finds discarded on the floor and returns it to the dartboard in the study, stabbing the blade into the bullseye. Then he empties every drawer in the office, removes each file and document. When everything is properly organized, he locates a set of suitcases in his adjoining rooms and fills them near bursting, a large leather-bound book cushioned between stacks of paper. He combs through his rooms, removing every personal belonging from the space. He extinguishes the office lamps and locks the door behind him. Before he leaves for the night, arms laden with suitcases and rolls of blueprint, Marco places a full bottle of brandy in a glass on the table next to Shandresh's chair. Chandresh does not even acknowledge his presence. He stares out the window into the darkness and rain. He does not hit the click of the door as Marco leaves. He has no shadow, Chandresh says to himself before he pours a glass of brandy. Very late in the evening, Chandresh has a rather lengthy conversation with the ghost of an old acquaintance he knows only as Prospero the Enchanter. Thoughts that might have drifted away on waves of brandy otherwise remain intact in his head, confirmed and secured by a defiant magician. Excuse me. 3 cups of tea with Lady Burgess. London, Basel, and Constantinople, 1900. Madame Anna Padva's studio is a remarkable space situated near Highgate Cemetery, with floor-to-ceiling window providing a panoramic view of London. Dress forms displayed elaborate gowns stand in groups and pairs, giving the impression of a party with a great many headless guests. Lady Burgess wanders through a gathering of black and white gowns as she waits for Madame Padva, pausing to admire one in ivory satin delicately covered with black velvet fretwork, like wrought iron in long scrolling lines and curves. I can make that in a color if you would like it for yourself, Madame Padva says as she enters the room, her cane accompanying her with a steady beat against the tile floor. It is too grand for me, Tanta Padva, Lainey says. They are difficult to balance without color, Madame Padva says, turning the form around and regarding the train with a narrowed eye. Too much white and people assume they are wedding gowns. Too much black and they become heavy and dour. This one may need more black, I think. I would like to add more of a sleeve, but Celia cannot abide them. Madame Padva shows Lainey around the rest of her latest work, including a wall of recent sketches, before they sit down for tea at a table by one of the windows. You have a new assistant every time I visit, Lainey remarks, after the latest version brings a tray with the tea and quickly disappears again. They get bored of waiting for me to die, and then they flit off to work for someone else. Once they decide shoving me out of a window and hoping I might roll down the hill into a mausoleum is too much trouble. I am an old woman with a lot of money and no heir. They are well-coiffed vultures. This one will not last more than a month. I had always assumed you would leave everything to Chandresh, Lainey says. Chandresh is not in need of any of this financially, and I do not think he would be able to manage the business end of things the way I would prefer. He does not have the eye for it. Not that he has the eye for much of anything these days. Is he that unwell? Lainey asks, stirring her tea. He has lost something of himself, Madame Padva says. I have seen him become preoccupied with projects before, but nothing to this degree. It has rendered him a ghost of what he was, though in Chandresh's case, a ghost of his former self is more vibrant than most people. I do what I can. I find avant-garde ballet companies to occupy his theaters. I prop him up at the opera when he should be doing the same for me. She takes a sip of her tea before adding, and not to bring up a delicate subject, my dear, but I keep him far away from trains. That is likely wise, Lainey says. I have known him since he was a child. It is the least I can do. Lainey nods. She has other questions, but she decides that they are best saved for someone else to whom she has been meaning to pay a visit. For the rest of the afternoon, they discuss no more than fashion and art movements. Madame Padva insists on making her a less formal version of the ivory and black gown in peach and cream, finishing a sketch in a matter of minutes. When I do retire, This is all going to you, my dear, Madame Padua says before Lainey leaves. I would not trust anyone else with it. The office is large but looks smaller than it is due to the volume of its contents. While a great deal of its walls are composed of frosted glass, most of it is obscured by cabinets and shelves. The drafting table by the window is all but hidden in the meticulously ordered chaos of papers and diagrams and blueprints. The bespectacled man seated behind it is almost invisible, blending in with his surroundings. The sound of his pencil scratching against paper is as methodical and precise as the ticking of the clock in the corner. It is identical to an office that occupied a similar space in London and then moved, it is identical to an office that occupied a similar space in London and then another in Vienna before it was moved here to Basel. Mr. Barris put his pencil down and pours himself a cup of tea. He nearly drops it when he looks up and sees Lainey Burgess standing in his doorway. Your assistant appeared to be out in a moment, she says. I did not mean to startle you. That's quite all right, Mr. Barris says, putting his teacup down on the desk before rising from his chair. I was not expecting you until later this evening. I took an earlier train, Lainey says, and I wanted to see you. More time spent with you is always a pleasure, said Mr. Barris. Tea? Lainey nods as she navigates her way around the crowded office to the chair on the other side of the desk. What is it that you discussed when Tara visited you in Vienna? She asks before she even taken her seat. I thought you knew, he says without looking at her, keeping his attention on the teapot as he pours. We are two different people, Ethan. Just because you could never decide which one of us you were in love with does not make us interchangeable. He puts on the pot and prepares her tea, knowing how she likes it without having to ask. I asked you to marry me, and you never gave me an answer, he says as he stirs. You asked me after she died, Lainey says. How could I ever be certain that it was a choice you made, or one that was made for you? He hands her the cup of tea, resting his hands over hers as he takes it. I love you, he says. I loved her as well, but it was never the same. You were as dear as family to me, all of you. More dear, in some cases. He returns to his chair, removing his spectacles to wipe them with his handkerchief. I don't know why I wear these things, he says, looking down at them. I haven't needed them for years. You wear them because they suit you, Lainey says. Thank you, he says as he replaces them, watching her as she sips her tea. That offer still stands. I know, Lainey says. I am considering it. Take your time, Mr. Barris says. We appear to have a great deal of it. Lainey nods, placing her teacup on the desk. Tara was always the rational, sensible one, she says. We balanced each other. That was one of the reasons we excelled at whatever we did. She grounded my imaginative ideas. I saw in detail while she saw in scope. Not seeing the scope is why I'm here and she is not. I took each element separately and never looked to see that they did not fit together properly. The clock ticks heavily through the pause that follows. I do not want to have this conversation, Mr. Barris says, once the ticking became insufferable. I did not want to have it with her then, and I do not want to have it with you now. You know what's going on here, don't you? Lainey asks. Mr. Barris straightens his pile of papers on his desk while he considers his response. Yes, he says after a moment. I do. Did you tell my sister? No. Then tell me, Lainey says. I cannot. To explain would involve breaking a trust, and I am not willing to do that, not even for you. How many times have you lied to me? Lainey asks, rising from her chair. I have never lied, Mr. Barris counters, standing as well. I do not share what I am not at liberty to say. I gave my word and I intend to keep it, but I have never lied to you. You never even asked me. You assumed I knew nothing. Tara asked you, Lainey says. Indirectly, Mr. Burris says. I do not think she knew what to ask, and I would not have answered if she did. I was concerned about her, and I suggested that she speak with Alexander if she wanted answers. I assumed that's why she was at the station. I do not know if she ever spoke to him. I have not asked. Alexander knows as well? Lainey asks. I believe there is little, if anything, that he is ignorant about. Lainey sighs and returns to her chair. She picks up her cup of tea and then, without taking a sip, puts it down again. Mr. Barris crosses to the other side of the desk and takes her hand in his, making sure she looks him in the eye before he speaks. I would tell you if I could, he says. I know that, Ethan, she says. I do. She squeezes his hand softly to reassure him. I don't mind this, Lainey, Mr. Burris says. I move my office every few years. I hire a new staff. I keep up with projects through correspondence. It's not a difficult thing to manage considering what I receive in return. I understand, she says. Where is the circus now? I'm not certain, but I believe it recently left Budapest, though I do not know where it is en route. I can find out. Frederick will know, and I owe him a telegram. How will Herr Thyssen know where the circus is headed? Because Celia Bowen tells him. Lainey does not ask any further questions. Mr. Barris is relieved when she accepts the invitation to join him for dinner, and even more so when she agrees to extend her stay in Switzerland before catching up with the circus. Lainey invites Celia to join her at the Para Palace Hotel in Constantinople as soon as she reaches the city. She waits in the tea lounge, two lightly steaming, tulip-shaped glasses with matching saucers resting upon the tiled table in front of her. When Celia arrives, they greet each other warmly. Celia inquires about Lainey's journey before they discuss the city and the hotel, including the sweeping height of the room they sit within. It's like being in the acrobat tent, Lainey remarks, looking up at the domes that line the ceiling, each one dotted with circles of turquoise-tinted glass. You have not been to the circus in far too long, Celia says. We will have your costumes if you would like to join the statues this evening. Thank you, but no, Lainey says. I'm not in the mood to stand so still. You're welcome any time, Celia says. I know, Lainey says. Though truthfully, I'm not here for the circus. I'm here to speak with you. What is it that you'd like to speak about? Celia asks, a look of concern falling over her face. My sister was killed at St. Pancras Station after a visit to the Midland Grand Hotel, Lainey says. Do you know why she went there? Celia's grip on her tea glass tightens. I knew who she went there to see, she says, carefully choosing her words. I suppose Ethan told you that. Celia nods. Do you know why she went to see him? Lainey asks. No, I do not. Because she didn't feel right, Lainey says. She knew down to her bones that her world had changed, and she had received no explanation, nothing to grasp onto, to understand. I believe we all have felt similarly, and we're all dealing with it in different ways. Ethan and Tanta Padva both have their work to consume their time, to keep their minds occupied. I had not concerned myself with it at all for quite a while. I love my sister dearly, and I always will, but I think she made a mistake. I thought it was an accident, Celia says softly, looking down at the patterned tile on the table. No, before that. Her mistake was asking the wrong questions of the wrong people. It's not a mistake I plan on repeating. That's why you're here. That is why I'm here, Lainey says. How long have we known each other, Celia? Over 10 years. Surely by now you could trust me enough to tell me what it is that's really going on here. I doubt you dare to tell me it is nothing, or suggest I not trouble myself with such matters. Celia places her glass on its saucer. She explains as best as she can. She keeps the details vague, covering only the basic concepts of the challenge, and how the circus functions as a venue. How certain people know more than others on every level, though she chooses not to name each individual and makes it clear that even she does not have all the answers. Lainey says nothing. She listens carefully and occasionally sips her tea. How long has Ethan known? She asks when Celia has finished. A very long time, she says. Lainey nods and lifts her glass to her lips, but instead of sipping her tea, she opens her fingers, releasing her grip. The cup falls, crashing into the saucer below. The glass shatters, the sound echoing through the rooms. The tea spills out over the tiles. Before anyone turns at the noise, the cup has righted itself. The broken pieces reform around the liquid, and the glass sits intact. The tile surface on the table is dry. Those who glance over at the table at the noise assume it was their imagination and return their attention to their own tea. Why didn't you stop it before it broke? Lainey asks. I don't know, said Celia. If you ever need anything from me, I would like you to ask, Lainey says as she stands to leave. I'm tired of everyone keeping their secrets so well that they get other people killed. We are all involved in your game, and it seems we are not as easily repaired as teacups. Celia sits alone for some time after Lainey departs, both cups of tea growing cold. Stormy Seas, Dublin, June, 1901. After the illusionist takes her bow and disappears before her rapt audience of eyes, they clap, applauding the empty air. They rise from their seats and some of them chatter with their companions, marveling over this trick, or that they file out the door that has reappeared on the other side of the tent. One man sitting in the outer circle of the chairs remains in his seat as they leave. His eyes, almost hidden in the shadow cast by the brim of his bowler hat, are fixed on the space in the center of the circle that the illusionist occupied only moments before. The rest of the audience departs. The man continues to sit. After a few minutes, the door fades into the wall of the tent, invisible once more. The man's gaze does not waver. He does not so much as glance at the vanishing door. A moment later, Celia Bowen is sitting in front of him, turned to the side and resting her arms on the back of the chair. She's dressed as she had been during her performance, in a white gown covered in a pattern of unassembled puzzle pieces, falling together into darkness along her hem. You came to visit me, she says, unable to hide the pleasure in her voice. I had a few days, Margot says, and you haven't been near London recently. We'll be in London in the autumn, Celia says. It's become somewhat traditional. I couldn't wait that long to see you. It's good to see you as well, Celia says softly. She reaches out and straightens the brim of his hat. Do you like the cloud maze? He asks. He takes her hand in his as she lowers it. I do, she says, her breath catching as his fingers close over her. Did you persuade our Mr. Barris to help with that? I did indeed, Margot says, running his thumb along the inside of her wrist. I thought I could use some assistance in getting the balance right. Besides, you have your carousel and we share the labyrinth. I only thought it's fair that I have a Barris original of my own. The intensity of his eyes and his touch rush over Celia like a wave, and she takes her hand from his before it pulls her under. Have you come to show me your own feats of illustrious illusions? She asks. It was not on my agenda for the evening, but if you would like. You already watched me. It would only be fair. I could watch you all night, he says. You have, Celia says. You've been in every single audience this evening. I noticed. She stands and walks to the center of the circle, turning so her gown swirls around her. I can see every seat, she says. You are not hidden from me when you sit in the back row. I thought I would be too tempted to touch you if I sat in the front, Marco says, moving from his chair to stand at the edge of the circular platform space, just inside the first row of chairs. Am I close enough for your illusion? She asks. If I say no, will you come closer? He retaliates, not bothering to hide his grin. In response, Celia takes another step towards him, the hem of her gown brushing over his shoes, close enough for him to lift his arms and gently rest his hands on her waist. You didn't have to touch me last time, she remarks, but she does not protest. I thought I'd try something special, Marco says. Should I close my eyes? Celia asks playfully. Instead of answering, he spins her around so she faces away from him, keeping his hands on her waist. Watch, he whispers in her ear. The striped canvas side of the tent stiffens, the soft surface hardening as the fabric changes to paper. Words appear over the walls, typeset letters overlapping handwritten text. Celia can make out snatches of Shakespearean sonnets and fragments of hymns to Greek goddesses as the poetry fills the tent. It covers the walls and the ceilings and spreads out over the floor. And then the tent begins to open, the paper folding and tearing. The black stripes stretch out into empty space as their white counterparts brighten, reaching upwards and breaking apart into branches. Do you like it? Marco asks, once the movement settles as they stand within a darkened forest of softly glowing, poem-covered trees. Celia can only nod. He reluctantly releases her, following as she walks through the trees, reading bits of verse on branch and trunk. How do you come up with such images? She asks, placing her hand over the layered papered bark of one of the trees. It is warm and solid beneath her fingers, illuminated from within like a lantern. I see things in my mind, Marco says. In my dreams, I imagine what you might like. I don't think you're meant to be imagining how to please your opponent, Celia says. I have never fully grasped the rules of the game, so I'm following my instincts instead, said Marco. My father is still purposely vague about the rules, Celia says as they walk through the trees, particularly when I inquire as to when or how the verdict will be determined. Alexandra is also negligent to provide that information. I hope he does not pester you as much as my father does me, Celia says, though of course my father has nothing better to do. I have hardly seen him in years, Marco says. He has always been distant and not terribly forthcoming, but he is the closest thing to family I have, and yet he tells me nothing. I'm rather jealous, Celia says. My father constantly tells me what a disappointment I am. I refuse to believe you could ever be a disappointment to and I refuse to believe you could ever disappoint anyone, Marco says. You've never had the pleasure of meeting my father. Would you tell me what really happened to him? Marcos asks. I'm quite curious. Celia sighs before she begins, pausing beside a tree etched with words of love and longing. She never told anyone this story, never been given the opportunity to relate it to anyone who would understand. My father has always been somewhat overambitious, she starts. What he meant to do, he did not accomplish. Not as he intended. He wanted to remove himself from the physical world. How would that be possible? Marco asks. Celia appreciates that he does not immediately dismiss the idea. She can see him trying to work it out in his mind, and she struggles with the best way to explain it. Suppose I had a glass of wine, she says. A glass of red wine appears in her hand. Thank you. If I took this wine and poured it into a basin of water, or a lake, or even the ocean, would the wine itself be gone? No, it would only be diluted, Marco says. Precisely, Celia says. My father figured out a way to remove his glass. As she speaks, the glass in her hand fades, but the wine remains, floating in the air. But he went straight for the ocean rather than a basin or even a larger glass. He has trouble pulling himself back together again. He can do it, of course, but with difficulty. Had he been content to haunt a single location, he would likely be more comfortable. Instead, the process left him adrift. He has to cling to things now. He haunts his townhouse in New York, theaters he performed in often. He holds to me when he can, though I have learned how to avoid him when I wish to. He hates that, particularly because I am simply amplifying one of his own shielding techniques. Could it be done? Marco asks. What he was attempting? Properly, I mean. Celia looks at the wine hovering without its glass. She raises a hand to touch it and it quivers, dividing into droplets and then coming back together again. I believe it could, she says, under the right circumstances. It would require a touchstone, a place, a tree, a physical element to hold on to, something to prevent drifting. I suspect my father simply wanted the world at large to function as his, but I believe it would have to be more localized, to function as a glass, but leave more flexibility to move within. She touches the hovering wine again, pushing it towards the tree she stands behind. The liquid seeps into the paper, slowly saturating it until the entire tree glows a rich crimson in a forest of white. You're manipulating my illusion, Marco says, looking curiously at the wine-soaked tree. You're letting me, Celia says. I wasn't certain I'd be able to. Could you do it? Marco asks, what he was attempting. Celia regards the tree thoughtfully for a moment before replying. If I had a reason to, I think I could, she says, but I'm rather fond of the physical world. I think my father was feeling his age, which was more advanced than it appeared, and did not relish the idea of rotting in the ground. He may have also wished to control his own destiny, but I cannot be certain, as he did not consult me before he attempted it. Left me with a lot of questions to answer and a funeral to fake, which is easier than you might suppose. But he speaks with you, Marco asks. He does, though not as often as he once did. He looks the same. I think it's an echo, his consciousness remaining the semblance of a physical form. But he lacks solidity and it vexes him terribly. He might have been able to stay more tangible if he had done it differently. So I'm not certain I'd want to be stuck in a tree for the rest of eternity myself. Would you? I think that would depend on the tree, Marco says. He turns to the crimson tree, and it glows brighter, the red of embers shifting to the bright warmth of fire. The surrounding trees follow suit. As the light from the trees increase, it becomes so bright that Celia closes her eyes. The ground beneath her feet shifts, suddenly unsteady, but Marco puts a hand on her waist to keep her upright. When she opens her eyes, they are standing on the quarterdeck of a ship in the middle of the ocean. Only the ship is made of books. It sails thousands of overlapping pages, and the sea it floats upon a dark black ink. Tiny lights hang across the sky, like tightly packed stars as bright as suns. I thought something vast would be nice after all the talk of confined spaces, Marco says. Celia walks to the edge of the deck, running her hands along the spines of the books that form the rail. A soft breeze plays with her hair, bringing with it the mingling scent of dusty tomes and damp, rich ink. Marco comes and stands next to her as she looks at the midnight sea that stretches out a clear horizon, with no land in sight. It's beautiful, she says. She glances down at his right hand resting on the rail, frowning as she regards his bare, unmarked fingers. Are you looking for this? He asks, moving his hands with a flourish. The skin shifts, revealing the scar that wraps around his ring finger. It was made by a ring when I was 14. It says something in Latin, but I don't know what it was. Esse quam verde, Celia says, to be rather than to seem. It's the Bowen family motto. My father was very fond of engraving it on things. I'm not entirely sure he appreciated the irony. That ring was likely something like this one. She places her right hand next to his, along the adjoining books. The silver band on her finger is engraved with what Marco had thought was an intricate filigree, but the same phases in a looping script. She twists the ring, sliding it down her finger so he can see the matching scar. It is the only injury I have never been able to fully heal, she says. Mine was similar, Marco says, looking at her ring, as though his eyes kept moving to the scar instead. Only it was gold. Yours were made by something of Alexander's. Celia nods. How old were you? He asks. I was 6 years old. The ring was plain and silver. It was the first time I met someone who could do the things my father did, though he seemed so very different from my father. He told me I was an angel. It was the loveliest thing anyone has ever said to me. It is an understatement, Marco says, placing his hand over hers. A sudden breeze tugs at the layered paper sails. The pages flutter as the surface of the ink ripples below. You did that, Marco says. I didn't mean to, Celia says, but she did not take her hand away. I don't mind, Marco says, twining his fingers with hers. I can do that myself, you know. Not nice, hello! Welcome. Thank you for being here. Wasabi, hi! I'm sorry I didn't get to see you. Hi! I hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you guys are enjoying the story. Thank you for being here. Let me take a sip of tea before I continue. The wind increases, sending waves of dark ink crashing into the ship. Pages fall from the sails, swirling around them like leaves. The ship begins to tilt, and Celia almost loses her footing, but Marco puts his arm around her waist to steady her while she laughs. This is quite impressive, Mr. Illusionist, she says. Call me by my name, he says. He has never heard her speak his name, and holding her in his arms, he suddenly craves the sound. Please, he adds when she hesitates. Marco, she says, her voice low and soft. The sound of his name on her tongue is even more intoxicating than he had imagined, and he leans in to taste it. Just before his lips reach hers, she turns away. Celia, Marco sighs against her ear, filling her name with all the desire and frustration she feels herself, his breath hot on her neck. I'm sorry, she says. I don't want to make this any more complicated than it already is. He says nothing, keeping his arms around her, but the breeze begins to settle. The waves pounding against the ship become calm. I have spent a great deal of my life struggling to keep myself in control, Celia says, leaning her head against his shoulder. To know myself inside and out, everything kept in perfect order. I lose that when I'm with you. That frightens me, and I don't want you to be frightened, Marco interrupts. It frightens me how much I like it, Celia finishes, turning her face back to his. How tempting it is to lose myself in you, to let go, to let you keep me from breaking chandeliers rather than constantly worrying about it myself. I could. I know. They stand silently together as the ship drifts towards an endless horizon. Come away with me, Marco says. Anywhere. Away from the circus. Away from Alexander and your father. We can't, Celia says. Of course we can, Marco insists. You and I together, we can do anything. No, Celia says. We can only do anything here. I don't understand. Have you ever thought about it? About simply leaving? Really, truly thought about it with the intent to follow through and not as a dream on our passing fancy? When he does not answer, she continues. Think about it right now. Picture us abandoning this place and this game and starting over somewhere else, and mean it. Marco closes his eyes and draws it out in his mind, focusing not on the wishful dream but on the practicalities, planning out the smallest details from organizing Shinjusha's book for a new accountant to packing the suits in his flat, even down to the wedding bands on their fingers. Then his right hand began to burn, the pain sharp and searing, beginning at the scar around his finger and racing up his arm, blocking out every thought in his mind. It is the same pain from when the scar was made, increasing to 1,000-fold. The motion of the ship ceases instantly. The paper crumbles and the ocean of ink fades away, leaving only a circle of chairs inside a striped tent as Marco collapses to the floor. The pain ebbs slightly when Celia kneels to him and takes his hand. The night of the anniversary party, she says. The night you kissed me. I thought it that night. I didn't want to play anymore. I only wanted to be with you. I thought I would ask you to run away with me, and I meant it. The very moment I convinced myself that we could manage it, I was in so much pain that I could barely stand. Frederick didn't know what to make of me. He sat me in a quiet corner and held my hand and did not pry when I couldn't explain it, because that's how kind he is. She looks down at the scar on Marco's hand as he struggles to catch his breath. I thought perhaps it was about you, she says. So once I tried not boarding the train as it departed, then it was just as painful. Well, we are well and truly bound. You wanted to run away with me, Marco says, smiling despite the lingering pain. I wasn't sure that kiss would be quite so effective. You could have made me forget, taking it out of my memory as easily as you did with everyone else at the party. That was not particularly easy, Marco says, and I did not want you to forget. I couldn't, Celia says. How are you feeling? Miserable, but the pain itself is fading. I told Alexander I wanted to quit that night. I must not have meant it. I only wanted a reaction from him. It is likely meant to make us think we're not caged, Celia says. We cannot feel the bars unless we push against them. My father says it would have been easier if we did not concern ourselves so with each other. Perhaps he is right. I've tried, Marco says, cupping her face in his hands. I've tried to let you go, and I cannot. I cannot stop thinking of you. I cannot stop dreaming about you. Do you not feel the same for me? I do, says Celia. I have you here, all around me. I sit in the ice garden to get hints of this way that you make me feel. I feel it even before I knew who you were, and every time I think it cannot possibly get any stronger, it does. Then what is stopping us from being together now, he asks. He slides his hand down from her face, following the neckline of her gown. I want to, Celia says, gasping as his hands move lower. Believe me, I want to. This is not only about you and me. There are so many people tangled up in this game. It's becoming more and more difficult to keep everything in order. And this, she rests her hands over his. This is extremely distracting. I worry what might happen if I lose my concentration. So you don't have a power source, he says. She looks at him confused. A power source? She repeats. The way I use the bonfire as a conduit, borrowing energy from the fire. You don't have anything like that. You only work with yourself. I don't know any other way, Celia says. You are constantly controlling the circus, Marco asks. Celia nods. I'm accustomed to it. Most of the time it is manageable. I can't imagine how exhausting that must be. He kisses her softly on the forehead before letting her go, staying as close to her as he can without touching. And then he tells her stories. Myths he learned from his instructor, fantasies he created for himself, inspired by bits and pieces of other read in archaic books with crackling spines, circus concepts that would not fit in tents. She responds with tales from her childhood spent in the back rooms of the theater, adventures in far-flung cities and the circus has visited. She recounts events from her spiritualist days, delighted when he finds the endeavors as absurd as she had at the time. They sit and talk until just before dawn, and he leaves her only when the circus is about to close. Marco holds Celia to his chest for a moment before he stands, pulling her up with him. He takes a card from his pocket that contains only the letter M and an address. I have been spending less time at Chandra's residence, he says, handing her the card. When I am not there, this is where you'll find me. You are welcome any time, day or night, should you ever be in the mood for a distraction. Thank you, Celia says. She turns the card over on her finger and it vanishes. When all of this is over, no matter which of us wins, I will not let you go so easily. Agreed? Agreed. Marco takes her hand and brings it to his lips, kissing the silver ring that conceals her scar. Celia traces the line of his jaw with her fingertips. Then she turns, disappearing before he can reach out to pull her back. Wow! That was an intense chapter, oh my. An entreaty. Concord, Massachusetts, October 30th, 1902. The sheep are in a terrible mood today as Bailey attempts to usher them from one field to another. They have resisted prodding, swearing, and pushing, insisting that the grass in their current field is much nicer than the grass on the other side of the gate, and the low stone wall, no matter how much Bailey tries to persuade them otherwise. And then there's a voice behind him. "Hello, Bailey." Poppet looks so wrong somehow, standing there on the opposite side of the wall. The daylight is too bright and surrounding too mundane and green. Her clothes, even though they are her incognito wear and not her fancy circus costume, seem too fancy. Her skirt too ruffled for everyday wear. Her boots, though dusty, too dainty and impractical for walking across a farm. She wears no hat, her red hair loose, whipping around her head in the wind. "Hello, Poppet," he says once he recovers from his surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you about something," she says. "Ask you something, I mean." "You couldn't wait until midnight?" Bailey asks. Meeting up with Poppet and Widget almost as soon as the circus opens each evening has become a nightly routine. Poppet shakes her head. "I thought it would be better to give you time to think about it," she says. "Think about what?" "Think about coming with us." Bailey blinks at her. "What?" he manages to ask. "Tonight is our last night here," she says. "And I want you to come with us when we leave." "You're joking," Bailey says. Poppet shakes her head. "I'm not. I swear I'm not. I wanted to wait until I was sure it was the right thing to ask. The right thing to do, and I'm sure, now. It's important." "What do you mean? Important how?" Bailey asks. Poppet sighs. She looks up, peering as though she's searching for the stars hidden behind the blue sky dotted with fluffy white clouds. "I know you're supposed to come with us," she says. "I know that part for certain." But why? Why me? What would I do, just tag along? I'm not like you and Widget. I can't do anything special. I don't belong in the circus. "You do! I'm certain that you do. I don't know why yet, but I'm sure you belong with me. With us, I mean." A scarlet blush creeps into her cheeks. "I'd like to, I would, I just..." Bailey looks around at the sheep, at the house and the barn on a hill lined with apple trees. It would either solve the argument of Harvard versus farm, or make it much, much worse. "I can't just leave," he says, though it is not, he thinks, exactly what he means. "I know," Poppet says. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't ask you to, but I think..." "No, I don't think. I know. I know that if you don't come with us, we won't be back." "We won't be back here? Why?" "Won't be back anywhere," Poppet says. She raises her eyes to the sky again, scowling at it before she turns back to Bailey. "If you don't come with us, there won't be any more circus. And don't ask me why. They don't tell me why." She gestures at the sky, at the stars beyond the clouds. "They just say that in order for there to be a circus in the future, you need to be there. You, Bailey. You, me, and Widget. I don't know why it's important that it's all three of us, but it is. If not, it will just crumble. It's already starting." "What do you mean? The circus is fine." I'm not sure it's anything that really is noticeable from the outside. If one of your sheep was sick, would I notice?" "Probably not," Bailey says. "But you would," Poppet asks. Bailey nods. "That's how it is within the circus. I know that's how it's supposed to feel, and it doesn't feel like that right now, and it hasn't for a while. I can tell something is wrong, and I can feel it crumbling like cake that doesn't have enough icing to hold it together, but I don't know what it is. Does that make sense?" Bailey only stares at her, and she sighs before continuing. "Remember the night we were in the labyrinth, when we got stuck in the birdcage room?" Bailey nods. "I've never been stuck anywhere in the labyrinth before. Never. If we can't find our way out of a room or a hall, I can focus and I can feel where the doors are. I can tell what's behind them. I try not to do it because it's not any fun that way, but that night when we couldn't figure it out and it didn't work, I started to feel unfamiliar, and I don't know what to do about it." "But how can I do anything to help?" Bailey asks. "You're the one who finally found the key, remember?" Poppet says. "I keep looking for answers, for the right thing to do, and nothing's been clear except for you. I know it's too much to ask to have you leave your home and your family, but the circus is my home and my family, and I can't lose them. Not if there's something I can do to prevent it. I'm sorry. She sits on the rock wall, facing away from him. Bailey sits next to her, still facing the field and the incorrigible sheep. They sit in silence for a while. The sheep wander in lazy circles, nibbling on the grass. Do you like it here, Bailey? Poppet asks, looking out over the farm. Not particularly, Bailey says. Have you ever wished for someone to come and take you away? Did Witch tell you that? Bailey asks, wondering if the thought is so strong that if it sits on him, evident and readable. No, Puppet says. It was a guess, but Witch did ask me to give you this. She pulls a tiny glass bottle from her pocket and hands it to him. Bailey knows that though that bottle appears empty, it is not. He is too curious not to open it immediately. He pulls out the minuscule stopper, relieved that it remains attached to the bottle with a curl of wire. The sensation inside is so familiar, so comforting and recognizable and real that Bailey can feel the roughness of the bark, the smell of the acorns, even the chattering of the squirrels. He wanted you to be able to keep your tree with you, Poppy says, if you decide to come with us. Bailey replaces the stopper in the bottle. Neither of them speak for some time. The breeze tugs at Poppet's hair. How long do I have to think about it? Bailey asks quietly. We're leaving when the circus closes tonight, Poppet says. The tree will be ready before dawn, though it would be better if you could come earlier than that. Leaving can get a bit complicated. I'll think about it, Bailey says, but I can't promise anything. Thank you, Bailey, Poppet says. Can you do me one favor, though? If you're not going to come with us, could you not come to the circus tonight at all, and let this be goodbye? I think it would be easier. Bailey stares at her blankly for a moment, her words not quite sinking in. This is even more horrible than the choice to leave, but he nods because it feels like the proper thing to do. All right, he says. I won't come unless I'm going with you. I promise. Thank you, Bailey, Poppet says. She smiles, though he cannot tell if the smile is a happy one or not. Before he can tell her to tell Widget goodbye for him if need be, she leans forward and kisses him. Not on the cheek as she's done a handful of times before, but on the lips, and Bailey knows in that moment that he will follow her anywhere. Poppet turns without a word and walks away. Bailey watches until he can no longer see her hair against the sky and then continues to stare after her, the tiny bottle clutched in his hand, still uncertain of how to feel or what to do and left with only hours to decide. Behind him, the sheep left to their own devices decided to wander through the open gate into the field beyond. This is getting good, guys. This is getting so good. Let's see how time we are. I think I'm going to stop it here because in the next chapter is going to be... these chapters are long, so I think we're going to stop it here for now before we go into the next chapter. Which we'll do next time. We'll do it next time. It's getting so good. It's getting so good. I am loving this story so much. I'm loving this story so much. It's so good. The drama. And we're almost through. We are literally... we are 69% through of the story. Which is the perfect number to stop on for right now. We are so close to being done. So I think between next week and the week after, we'll be able to finish up the story. It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. I love it so much. I love it so much. And I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Can't wait to start this up next week. So tomorrow I won't be streaming. As you guys know, I don't stream normally on Wednesdays. But Thursday! What did I say we were going to do Thursday? Was it the creepypasta reading? Yeah. I think it was the creepypasta reading we were going to do. But yeah, we'll do the creepypasta reading. It'll be a lot of fun. Get to read some spooky, scary stories. And I haven't done one in a while, so it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, you guys, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is, whatever time zone it is where you are. And I hope you have a great day tomorrow as well. Thank you all so much for coming here. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being you and being wonderful and amazing and awesome. And yeah, I will see you guys on Thursday for the creepypasta reading. and other stuff that we might do, because I don't know if I want to do creepypasta reading the entire time. But I don't know. I don't know. If I we'll take it as it. We'll take it as is when it happens. I'm all over the place already. Alright, I love you guys so very, very much. And remember, hug your friends, tell someone you love them, and be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows the world needs more goodness. I love you all so very much, and I will see you guys next time. Bye! Oops, okay, hold on. Bye!